So today I want to share with you an idea or a concept known as activation energy. Now, this is a term that's oftentimes used in the world of chemistry, so you've likely never heard the term unless you're a chemist, or maybe you're good in chemistry at school. But I'm going to assume that you're not a chemist, and maybe you didn't pay too much attention in chemistry class at school. But regardless, this is a very valuable idea, whether you're a chemist or not, because it's going to demonstrate, as you'll see as we move along in this video, the power of small changes and how those can transform your life, your business, your health, your relationships, everything about what you do, these small, tiny changes. Now, before we get too far into it, it would probably be a good idea to discuss what activation energy actually is. And you can think of it as being the minimum energy needed in order to start a chemical reaction. The minimum energy required. Key idea, key element to keep in mind as we go through this. Now, to help you to understand this a little bit more, let's look at an example, an everyday life example of water's activation energy. So there's likely a good chance at some point in your life that you've boiled water. And if you haven't, at this point, it might be a good idea to try. It's pretty cool. But to boil water, what do we know? Well, we know that it has to reach a certain temperature point, and that is 212 degrees Fahrenheit. You could say that that is the activation energy required in order for water to transform from one state to another. And that's exactly what it does when it reaches 212 degrees. It transforms from liquid into a gas. So you could say 212 degrees Fahrenheit is its activation, the activation energy required in order to do that transformation process. Now, what do we know about the boiling process itself? Well, again, if you've ever boiled water, you know that it's a waiting game. You can't just set a pot of water onto a stove and expect it to start boiling right away, unless you have a nuclear-powered stove. And again, I'm going to assume that you don't. So you have to wait a little while. So you put the water on at 70 degrees Fahrenheit when you first put it on the stove, room temperature, and you crank up the heat and it gets up to 100, 150, 200 degrees. And if you were to check the temperature at some point, if you kept it on the stove, it reached 209 degrees, for example. And at 209 degrees, you could realize that this water is extremely, extremely hot. But you know what? It's not boiling. Even though it's very, very hot and you've spent a lot of time and energy to get to 209 degrees, it's still not at that point where the water is going to transform. And so you keep it on the heat a little bit longer, and it gets to 210, 211, and even hotter, but still nothing has happened to that water because it's not reached its activation energy point. But oh my goodness, when it hits 212, what happens? Everything changes because that water starts to boil. It's reached its activation energy point, and that's where it begins to do this transformation process. But again, it takes time to get there, doesn't it? Now, an important element to understand about this transformation process is that there's a tiny little tipping point that happens. The difference between 211 and 212 degrees may seem so small, and it really is. It's less than 0.5%. But that little tiny change, that little tiny amount has a huge, huge impact on the water itself because that's where it transforms. In other words, all the energy that you could spend to reach 211 degrees means very, very little. All the time waiting and just sitting there watching it get hotter and hotter and hotter and waiting means nothing unless you reach 212 degrees, because that is what is needed in order for activation energy to kick in. Another key idea. So life functions the same exact way. So when you look at your life, you may be spending a lot of time and energy making changes, spending energy on improvements. You're trying to reach that tipping point in your life or your business, doing something, a habit, reaching a goal, acquiring a skill. And it may seem Like you're doing everything that you possibly can to get good results, but you're not getting good results. You're getting very few results with all this energy and effort that you're putting in. Essentially, you could say your life, in comparison with this metaphor here, your life, the water is getting hot, but it's not boiling after a lot of time that you put into it. And this can be very exhausting. It can be very frustrating. And you may wonder if you're going to have to sustain the same intensity forever and ever. And you can be like, wow, this is just too much. I've been spending all this time and energy trying to acquire this skill, to practice this new habit, or get rid of an older one, or to reach a goal. And it's just not happening. It's taken so much time and energy. But here's the idea that you want to remember, and that is that the difference between where you are and where you want to be could be just one tiny degree. The tipping point of awesome may be so close in your life right now that all it takes to take that tipping point over is a small tweak, a push to do something a different way, or a change in your life somehow, if you stay committed to the goal, or the change, or the habit. Staying committed, keeping the pot on the stove, so to speak, so that the water continues to boil. In other words, more than hard work is needed. Hard work is a big part of the process, but it needs to be sustained work, week after week, month after month, until you reach that tipping point, until it triggers awesomeness. And it will if, again, you keep the pot on the stove until it starts to boil. Now, not understanding this, and there are a lot of people that don't understand that there is a point in time where a transformation will take place. You just have to sustain your effort. But not understanding this is why so many people give up too soon. They don't see the results right away. And so what do? They think, well, I'm just not built for this. I don't have the capabilities to do this. And this is just too much time and effort. And I can't put in this much time and effort for the rest of my life if that's what it's going to take. But what they don't understand is they may be just 1 degree away from that tipping point, the activation energy required for them to transform their life. And so they give up. Don't be like that. Stick with it until you reach the tipping point of awesome. So how do you use this? What are some next actions that we can look at? Well, of course, think of a habit that you want to adopt, a habit that you want to change perhaps, a goal, a skill that you want to acquire. Think of something like that you're working on right now or that you want to work on. And identify what may be the 1 degree difference that is going to be the transformation point for that habit, that goal, that skill for you. Do you need to practice more? Do you need to take in more knowledge? Is there a small change in your daily habits or your routine that you need to really implement? Or do you just need to give it more time? Perhaps that may be it. Maybe you just need to wait, because sometimes time is all that's required in order for that transformation process to take place. But identify what could be a potential 1 degree difference for you, and then implement that. And remember that your intention, whatever you may be doing, again, trying to reach a goal, trying to change a habit, trying to acquire a skill, your intention is to what? Reach the point of activation energy at some point. Because when you do, that's when you're going to transform from where you are to where you want to be. That is the tipping point of awesome.